reasoning. Allison is an adjunct professor at American University, where she teaches essentials of effective instruction for the Department of Education. She is Plato's board president and also serves on the boards of directors for Street Law, a national nonprofit committed to preserving and enhancing civics education in our schools, and for the Society for Ethics across the curriculum. So welcome, Allison, and we're excited to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's so good to see everyone. So I'm Allison Cohen. My day job, I am a high school teacher, and I am fortunate enough to be able to teach a philosophy elective. But in addition to my philosophy elective, I teach AP Seminar and AP U.S. Government. So the idea of facilitating and managing discussions is something that comes in handy a lot in teaching government, especially these days. And I think that that's part of why I'm so interested in this topic. It's because I find that students are very reluctant to engage in conversations about controversial topics. And not all philosophy discussions are controversial, but my students are just very hesitant to share their viewpoints in a way that they weren't maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So I've devoted a lot of attention to this question of how to facilitate and manage discussions so that they become a productive means of progressing understanding of a question, and getting students comfortable with talking about issues that they might not otherwise be comfortable talking about. So I'm just going to share a few of my ideas. And if you have any other questions about them, then feel free to put them in the chat. And I'd be happy to answer those in the Q&A portion. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hopefully I do this correctly. Okay, can everyone see that? Head shake? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so one of the things that I do is to really get students at the beginning of the year thinking about why don't they enjoy having conversations about controversial topics with their friends or with family members or in a classroom. And sometimes I come at this in the opposite way. I sort of ask them to describe what are the elements of those conversations that make it uncomfortable, that make them not want to have those discussions. And then I ask the opposite. So I said, okay, what does a good discussion look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like? And so I give students some time to really think about that. So their ideal discussion in their head, what does it look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like? And the answers that they come up with are fascinating. I wish I had sort of thought ahead and taken some pictures of the brainstorming that students do. But they say a lot of the things that we would expect them to say. A good discussion sounds like one person is talking at a time, for instance. It looks like everyone is comfortable and relaxed and not agitated. What does it feel like? Students will often say things like, it feels like I've been listened to. So you get some really good conversation going by just asking them to think about what are the elements of a conversation or that they want to avoid, and what are the elements of a conversation that they want to be engaged in, that would qualify as a good discussion. So that kind of forms, that's one tactic, that's one sort of technique that I use at the beginning of the school year. And that leads very nicely into developing as a class norms of discussion. And so these are norms that we just kind of brainstorm and we add to them, we take away throughout the year. So this is a fluid sort of list of norms. And I've just sort of included some of them that tend to come up every year, and ones that I just kind of want to remember. And so I'll just highlight a few of them. You can read the rest of them on your own. But a few of them that come up quite often that I find very interesting is that students want to listen to understand an alternative perspective, not to pounce or attack, right? And I think that we see a lot of that, especially on TV. We have a lot of negative examples of that. We can all imagine a conversation where people are listening to an argument and looking, like as they're listening, they're looking for ways to attack it, as opposed to really listening to understand. Developing intellectual confidence, that's an issue for a lot of students. A lot of students don't like participating in full class discussions. And so we work throughout the year to try to give them the confidence to do that. Developing intellectual openness, being open to the ideas of others and being willing to change. And normalizing, this is something that I focus a lot on in class, normalizing this idea that it's okay to not always have an answer, right? It's okay to say, that's an interesting point. I need to think about that. It doesn't mean that you agree with what the other person is saying. It just means I haven't thought about that yet. I need to think about it. Asking yourself constantly, can you restate the argument of an opposing position in a way that your opponent would agree with? And this is the idea of intellectual charity, right? So at any time in the conversation, would you be able to restate the argument of an opposing position in a way that they would say, yes, that's what I'm trying to say? And then I also have a set of norms that I use for impromptu discussions. So these are discussions that just kind of pop up in class. And so it's a smaller list, but important. So those sort of parameters of discussion, number one, talk to your classmates and not me, right? So the flow of conversation is between students and not through me as the teacher in the classroom. The person talking recognizes the next speaker, but they have to prioritize those who haven't spoken yet or who haven't spoken a lot. And if the discussion starts to lag, then someone needs to step in to recap where the group is, to summarize where is their consensus right now and which issues are still unresolved. The one thing I'll say about norms is that it's not enough, I found, to simply develop them as a class and to like sort of, I don't know, have them posted in the room somewhere. You have to be very deliberate about how you use them. And so I sort of have a formula that I follow for each like formalized discussion, scheduled discussion that we have as a class. So at the beginning of the discussion, we always sort of remind ourselves of the norms that we have developed as a class. And then sometimes we'll choose 2 or 3 to work on for that particular discussion. So we're prioritizing, okay, for this discussion, we're really going to work on, these 3 things. And then at the end of the discussion, and this is hard, and anyone who's been in the classroom knows how hard this is, make sure you stop in time to provide students an opportunity, not just to debrief the conversation, but to debrief how the class adhered to the norms of discussion. So I have them like formally write out an evaluation of themselves and an evaluation of the class. So how well did you exhibit intellectual humility? How well did the class, do you think, demonstrate intellectual humility? And then from that evaluation, we sort of decide, okay, so for the next discussion, our goals are going to be this. So based on the evaluation that they did, they sort of determine, okay, here are our goals for the next discussion. And then the next discussion, we review the norms, right? Same kind of routine. And then when we choose the 2 to 3 things that we're going to focus on, we go back to what we talked about in the last evaluation and say, okay, here are the things that we really wanted to focus on for our next discussion. So I would say that is super important, like a purposeful integration of norms and not just something you develop at the beginning of the year, kind of throw up and point to every now and then. And then I also use a variation on a deliberation method. I'll start students oftentimes in pairs where they decide on the 2 strongest arguments for one side. And then that pair joins another pair who had the side B, the other side of the argument. And then that group of 4 shares the strongest arguments from each side, and then they discuss the question. And then from those groups of 4, we have a whole class discussion. The reason I like this method is because it gives students who are a bit more uncomfortable speaking in front of a whole class discussion an opportunity to first try their ideas out in pairs and then in a smaller group. So they're kind of slowly building. And the idea is, and it works, sometimes. The idea is that as they go from this small pair to a group of four, they're building confidence along the way. And they have an opportunity to try out their idea with one person or with three other people before before the whole class trying their idea out. So that's one technique that's been really effective for me in getting students who might be a bit uncomfortable speaking in front of a whole group to be more comfortable doing that. And the last method that I use is something called argument mapping. And this is, this is a software and a sort of methodology that I use for like really more political, more argumentative discussions. So in a government class, we had a class discussion on sanctuary cities. The reason I like the argument maps, and we develop them as the students are having a discussion, is that you can do all sorts of cool things. So you can, like if a student raises a question, like states have the legal and constitutional authority to not gather information related to immigrant status and to not comply with ICE detainer requests. They can look at the justifications for that, and then they can decide, do they think this is a strong argument and they can make it stronger and the line gets bold? Or they can determine that, well, maybe this line of reasoning is weaker. And so they want to, and you can kind of diminish the line. So at the end of it, you have this really cool visual representation of students thinking. The other thing I love about this is that it focuses the conversation on highly controversial topics, topics where a teacher might be very nervous about opening up to a full class discussion. It really focuses the discussion on the argument itself, and students have a tendency to interact with the argument as much as they do one another. And so it diffuses a lot of the tension that sometimes surrounds conversations about controversial topics. So they feel much more comfortable saying something like, I really have an objection to premise 3.4, as opposed to, I really disagree with your argument that you just made, right? So they're not directing it to a student, they're directing it at the argument. And it just diffuses some of the tension in a way that opens up the discussion in a very productive manner. So this you can map objections, right? You can map counter arguments, and they can also label those. You know, if they think that's a strong counter argument, they can make that line bold as well. So those are just a few of the techniques that I use. Stop sharing. So those are just a few of the techniques that I use in my class to both facilitate discussion, getting students involved who might not otherwise be involved, but also to make sure that the conversation remains productive and doesn't go off on tangents and doesn't become something that's uncomfortable. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Allison. I don't know. I have questions, believe it or not, but that was very comprehensive. We did have a question that I just want to ask really fast. I think it's MindMap. Is that what that software is?
Yeah, so the software is MindMap. One of our partner organizations, so PLATO has partner organizations that we work with that are sort of compatriots in the efforts that Karen introduced us to. And Thinker Analytics is a nonprofit out of Harvard University's philosophy department, and they offer fantastic professional development on argument mapping. So the MindMap is a tool, but I would also recommend checking out Thinker Analytics and their professional development if it's something that you're interested in. great research backing it up. They are super wonderful, and Plato has been working with them for a number of years. I'm happy to throw that link in the chat in a bit as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've done something similar to that. So that is really, really helpful. We'll come back to a lot of the things that you said for sure. So if anyone did have any questions for Allison, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll make sure we keep track of them and then we'll come back. But I want to make sure we get to each of our panelists and give them equal time too. So without further ado, up next is our middle school teacher, Holly Doyle. Holly has over 20 years of experience in education and currently teaches Latin at Kent Place School, where she's also the director of the Girls Leadership Institute. She has a BA in Latin and English from Tulane University and an MAT in teaching Latin from Vanderbilt University. A former Peace Corps volunteer, Holly enjoys exploring ways to foster belonging in learning spaces and to bolster leadership skills and self-efficacy, especially for middle school girls. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. And I'm excited that everybody is interested in this topic. I love that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. Let's see. Okay. Can everybody see this? Okay, excellent. So I wanted to look at this a little bit from just almost a troubleshooting standpoint, because as I think we all have plans as we walk into the classroom, I think that's usually the first big step in classroom management. But as you know, the students also sometimes walk in with their own plan, especially in middle school. And so the more agile you can be with different tools, I think the easier it is to really meet the students where they are. And that's where they're like most excited to come along for the ride and to dig into material. So looking at, just before I go on, I do want to say classroom management, someone once described it in the middle school as like, the students want to know where the boundaries are. It just makes them feel a little bit like they can have all the fun and explore inside the boundaries if they know what those boundaries are. So I think that's kind of a general overview. And a lot of the strategies I'm going to share, I think that you may know the strategies, but I really want to dig into when they're very effective. So the first challenge that I think many teachers would have is, what if no one wants to share? What if you walk in there and you have this awesome discussion planned and it's silent? And this I found in middle school, tends to be more of an 8th grade than a 6th grade. So the 8th and the 6th are very different. And you may find that some of the high school strategies work better with 8th grade, and some of the elementary work better with 6th. And 7th grade, you just got to sort of feel out the class. But I think that that's a really important thing to think about in terms of middle school. But
Holly, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I really apologize. Your slides are not showing for the rest of us.
Oh, no.
So it just says loading. Do you want to unshare and reshare and see if that works? I really apologize for interrupting you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's no problem. And I can do it without, but it's more effective, I think, with. Let me see. All right. Yes. Okay. All right. So this is the second one. But the first one just had the title. So what happens if no one wants to share? The students I asked, I got their input too, to see what they actually enjoy in the classroom. And they said they love when the teacher, they didn't say a hook, but they described a hook. So when the teacher does something to really get them interested and curious at the beginning of class, and then gives them a little time to think through and sort of start the process, and then they jump into the discussion. So they really like having something exciting or interesting or something that gets their attention right at the beginning. So that's something. And when it's quiet, especially at the end of class, I like the one-word reactions. They're a great closer for everybody to hear each person's kind of perspective on the class. They also work really well as an opener, though, to get everybody actually using their voice, because sometimes just speaking is the hardest part for some students, that for the first time, once they start speaking, it's not as hard to continue, but just getting them, and the one word is easier for them. When it's totally quiet, you've asked a question, I think the first strategy is to go to a turn and talk. Turn to your partner, talk for a moment. It just, like Allison said, gives them a little bit, it's easier to take that academic risk and share your idea in a smaller space. You can also do this where they think first, then they pair up, and then they'll share out. And again, they're sharing together. So just making sure that everybody's voice is heard at some point, even if it's just through their ideas. Because I think it's important to remember that voice isn't always spoken. Their ideas can also be shared through writing and other ways if they can communicate them to the class that way. Thinking about a quick jot with evidence beforehand. The students love the small groups. And I think what's key to this is mixing it up enough, because as they're working with other students in the class, they're getting more comfortable with everyone in the class, and they're building trust within the class with each other. And so just building that community is how I think they build the space as well to be able to have these conversations. So, and then one person can share it out, and they can sort of find their roles as well. The next one, I think, is not so much for an interactive discussion, but where everybody needs to share their ideas, and it's a riskier thing. They have to kind of take a little bigger risk to share. So you can have them do this, even if you're noticing that they're feeling a little more reticent, but have them write down their ideas on index cards without their names. You collect them up, and then you pass them back out to different people, and they read them anonymously. So you can kind of discuss things that way as well. And the last one can be used also for the next slide, but something like 5 chips. Each student gets 5 little like bingo chips. And then you can see they put them on their desk. It works well in a round table discussion. If you put them on their desk, they each do as they're speaking. You can kind of moderate, okay, once everybody has one, then you can go on and have a second chance to talk. So it helps them share the air and see in a very visual way. And the students who really like to hold the space the entire time, they have 5 chips, and they got to figure out what's core. So that really helps them as well. Can you see this slide? Is this all? Okay, excellent. Now, the opposite problem sometimes, and I don't see this as a problem, but it can be difficult for classroom management, is what if everyone wants to share? Sylvie is going to be sharing some really great ideas too. So I'm going to let her do that part. But the students like to call on each other. You do have to watch to the classroom dynamics as this is happening, but let them sort of popcorn around. One person shares, then they call on the next person. So it allows them to have some agency. Middle schoolers love to have agency. And this is one way they get to have some choice in the classroom. And they feel very important too, calling on each other. Every once in a while, they feel pressure, but then you just step in and help. It's not a problem. The talking stick, I think most people are aware of, but you're passing around some sort of object, and you can speak when you have that. Stress ball works. Sometimes a beach ball is even fun to just have like a little energy. And again, I would read the room. See if they're really wild. I'm not sure I would bring the beach ball out that day, but just see what they need. You could even take them outside with that and let them have a conversation that way too. Perhaps seated, but they appreciate if they're really antsy to kind of feed into that need. Jamboard. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but this is a Google app, and they can post little Post-it notes, and everybody can see everybody else's, and they're done anonymously. And so it's a good way to get a lot of ideas out very quickly. And then you can organize them. It made me think a little bit of a very simple form of the argument mapping that Allison was just mentioning. So, and then you can even print them out later and put them up if you want to kind of have reminders of whatever ideas came up. Groups, this is similar to the last, but groups with some sort of share out. What's the conclusion your table came to? So everybody's voice is included, but not necessarily taking up the time in the classroom. There are silent discussions and a gallery walk where you have several posters around the room, or you could have them laid out on one on each table. And there might be a question, and then people can respond to it and cycle around in groups or separately. So there's lots of variations on that, but it does work. I think the more you can meet the students where they are, the more successful your classroom management is in moments where you're trying to bring out creativity and curiosity and wondering. Popsicle sticks, that is where you're writing. You could use whatever you'd like. I use popsicle sticks, but I have every student's name on a popsicle stick. And so for lots of activities, you can just pull names, and it gives it a very nice random, random format, as well as make sure again that you're sharing the air, because they know they're going to get a chance. It is not just what the student said. It's not going to be just a favorite that gets called on. So they know their stuff is in there and they like that. Their name is in there and it's coming up, and the other ones know, well, once I got called on, I'm not going to be called on again. So I could just relax a little bit, but it's a nice thing. And they see that. 4 corners is if you want everybody to make a choice, and they have to go. So you could put forth a question and you have 4 different options, and you have those words maybe posted around the room, or you tell them, go to this side, this side, this side. And the students walk to each corner that they agree with. And then usually in that corner, they discuss for a while, and then they can share out, or you can just move on to the next question. So you have, usually I try to get one from each corner sharing out to the group so they can hear. I think this is something that happens a lot, especially when you're a newer teacher. So what if one very vocal student is not following directions? What do you do? And I think the challenge with one is that sometimes one can become many. And you'll see very quickly in your classes who is leading as well within the students, because there are usually leaders within the students. But building connection is foundational. And I'm sure you've heard that, but even just taking the time as they wander into your classroom, or as you're running into them in the hall, I think those little moments, they're like money in the piggy bank, so that later you can kind of draw on that goodwill if you need it. It's there. It really is. They want to feel seen, cared about, and that you care about what they're saying too. And I think that's a way that they know that. So anyway, build connection. They also ask without judgment, but without an audience. Just ask them why something is happening. I think usually if you can ask in a way that you truly are curious, they'll respond and they'll be grateful. Because oftentimes it has nothing to do with the classroom. It has to do with something that happened before or after. But I think that's very helpful. I think the class responds most when they understand why actions are in their best interest. Nobody likes to be controlled, and middle schoolers do not like to be controlled. So the more they understand that actions and choices and kind of parameters are there for a reason and not just to make them do something they don't want to do, I think that is that's going to be very helpful. That's what they appreciate that. The one vocal student, if you can get their help with something, that's the best, because then they rise. And it's like this wonderful moment in the classroom where they get to use that leadership that they've been showing, but in a really positive way. And it's wonderful. So I think if you can find a way to do that, that's always a huge win. Make sure students never feel cornered, because if you're getting into a power struggle, it gets very tricky to get out of that. So if you can give them a graceful way out, that's helpful too. This was one of the most important things I learned as a new teacher, was students are learning, like they're watching your face. If you're laughing and you're saying, oh, stop, they see that and they're getting the message that it's funny and that it's charming, and that, so making sure that whatever message you're giving is consistent on your face as well, with what you actually want. So that is something I think that's very difficult at the beginning for new teachers, because they want to be liked. And I think that students they find comfort within that space, but they do need a clear instruction, because lack of clarity that's where a lot of, I think, some of the challenges in classroom management happen. Appropriate scaffolding so they can be successful, so they're not frustrated, and models and examples of what to do. So Allison, I think you were doing a great job explaining some strategies so that you don't get to the point where emotions take over the discussion. But every once in a while, this sort of thing might happen. And I find if you need to take a pause, take a pause. I think you're modeling self-regulation for the students, and that's ultimately what they need too. Journaling is a great way. So you can say something like, I am going to take a pause here. I need to kind of clarify my own thoughts on this topic. And I think it would be helpful for me to hear everything that you all have to say. I'm going to pass out paper. Let's just take a moment to journal about what we're noticing in this space here, or your argument. So you can do either way. And we do have conversation norms at my school, and they are posted, and we do them regularly. I loved Allison's idea of choosing one to focus on. But I think that having those norms that are so ingrained and practiced all the time, you could look at civil discourse also has really good guidelines, but having that gives everybody a shared agreement. I agree with Allison that having that, when the class can create that, that's the best. Return to the evidence. And most importantly, if you're staying calm, they're going to feed off your energy. If you're really excited, they're going to get excited. If you're calm, it helps a lot. And it reassures them. So we actually want disagreement. I think that's where the best ideas come. And we all have different perspectives. One of the things I like to do is to have agree on one side of the room and disagree on the other, and they stand somewhere along there, and then they share why they chose where they're standing. So that's one of the things that I'll do. And then I'll ask several questions. I often will use that as a warm-up. So we get some of the ideas going, and they can move around. Having them consider the values underlying each side. I also like the idea that Allison was mentioning of having them, we've done was Hammurabi's code just or unjust? Big discussion about that. And as they're preparing, I always have them prepare both sides. And then when they come in, they find out which side they're going to be on. But, and ideally, we can get to a place where we're all learning from each other, which is what usually will happen. But I think it's mostly because they prepare both sides and they have to look at it from different angles. They know when we're asking questions that are where we already have the answer. So they're very clear on that. They want to know that you really want to know what they're sharing with you. So staying curious and discussing events and ideas, not people. Again, that you can find within civil discourse. And building community, like switching off, like who's working with whom. Just those moments where they get to know each other one-on-one builds a lot of trust. So genuine wondering, open-minded listening, having students prepare discussion questions ahead of time. I've done roundtable discussions about which pharaoh did the most for Egypt, and they had to prepare ahead of time We started as a whole group and did a discussion, a roundtable discussion. Later on, we did smaller roundtable discussions because they already knew the format. And they had to think about, okay, which questions do I need to ask to be able to move this conversation forward? And that was part of their homework, was preparing those questions. Not answers, but just questions. Even when we were preparing for the big roundtable, they had like a graphic organizer to help them know all the points and organize their points so that when they came into the discussion, that was easier for them. But they do tend to share when they think you care and they're going to have impact. Is it meaningful? Are you just asking me to ask me, or are you asking me because it's going to change something? Middle schoolers love to change things. Having a do now or something they get started on at the beginning of a class period has them come in to an area of structure. And I love to have quotes for the beginning. In fact, in my Latin 6 classes, we would start every class with a proverb. And so they would write about, they would be connecting to the quote, thinking about it from several different angles. And then they'd share out and they'd listen to each other, build on each other's ideas. But the quotes kind of helped them connect to history and make it more meaningful. Having a timer visible, just projected, lets them know as things are going along. So I think that's helpful. And having tasks clearly defined if you're doing a project, another helpful piece. This is my last slide for you. Make your actions match your words. Enlist students in class norms. A classroom choice reward jar is that is gold. You can have some sort of celebration. They could have some sort of activity. Sylvie, I'm guessing, might share something about that. I don't know, but I know that my own children have gone through that, and it always is a winning classroom management technique. Attention getters, you need to have several of these in your back pocket. And these you can do, we're going to start in 5, 4, 3. You can give them a countdown. I like to do like patterned claps because they're fun and they enjoy that when you switch up the pattern and they get caught on to that. I think changing levels can also help if they're having a little trouble focusing. So just so that you're not, I think when you're having a class discussion, you want everybody on the same level. But if you're giving directions, sometimes that it's a little easier for them the other way. And nonverbal redirection, you can use Post-its to give them some info. Some teachers more in primary will use a stoplight, change of scenery. And finally, some teachers, I think, like to build in, I always built in movement. And some teachers will build in a moment for them to have in the classroom where they can have unstructured conversation. So every once in a while, I'll use a transition time for that. And I just let them have that because I know they need it. Like it's a little bit of a dopamine rush for them. And so if I don't build it in, they're going to find it. So it's better when I do build it in. But those are just some tips that I have for you. If you have any questions, please ask. But now, Sylvie, I know we're going to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was great. Before I move on to Sylvie, and I want to get to you very quickly too, Sylvie, I just had one question that I feel like we could maybe get to really quickly before we move on. And somebody in the group asked if you could explain the 5 chips again, and just explain what you meant by, when you tell the students that it's in their best interest, not in yours. Can you just quickly respond to that again, because this person happened to just miss that portion of your presentation?
Sure. So the 5 chips, you could use Post-its, you could use whatever, but you're giving each student 5 markers, whatever they are. And as they're speaking each time in this discussion, they put one of their markers on the table, their desk. So if they're in a circle, everybody is going to see who has a chip up, especially if they're calling on each other. So if you've kind of taken yourself out and let them have that discussion. And so after everyone has 1 chip, then they can start calling on somebody a second time. So I hope that clarified. The other thing was, so when you give instructions, making sure that they understand the real why behind it. So, okay, make sure we get everything out. Let's get everything set up quickly because I want to make sure you have enough time to do, say, this GIM kit at the end of class. So like it's in their best interest, right? It's also in your best interest when things are organized quickly, but this way they understand why you're asking. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. That was awesome. Perfect. All right. So without further ado, I want to move on to our elementary school teacher on our panel. Sylvie Kovnat is a 3rd grade teacher at John Muir Elementary School in Seattle, Washington. She has been teaching for 9 years and has been a partner classroom with PLATO for the past 6 years. Sylvie loves having the Philosopher in Residence program in her classroom. So Sylvie, tell us what you think is most important.
Hello. It was really cool hearing from the high school and middle school first. I think often elementary goes first. So it was nice hearing from them first to sort of see that like the things that we really build in elementary school get continued in middle school and high school and just sort of upgraded into these like higher level things. Like we talk about taking your think time and we talk about restating what your partner says and just that the way that those ideas can be continued and built upon was very cool to hear. So I will also share my screen. Okay. Yes. Okay. So yes, I teach 3rd grade. I've taught 2nd grade for the last 8 years. So definitely sort of that middle elementary school is my sweet spot. A big thing that we use in elementary school is silent signals. Our school has a lot of multilingual learners, a lot of students with lots of different needs, and we just want to give lots of ways for students to participate that aren't just speaking. So we do I'm thinking, so tucking in your thumb to show that you're thinking, and then showing that you have an idea would be popping up your thumb. And even this week, like we're in math, especially, we were talking about the distributive property and multiplication. And I had kids sort of like, if you are starting to get it, like inch your thumb up, just different ways to show that like, I'm still thinking, but I'm moving towards getting it or having an idea. And that was fun to see them show that. We have the I agree signal and I disagree. And a thing I really try to push in my classroom is that we're agreeing with the idea, not the person, or we're disagreeing with the idea, not the person. And it's totally fine to disagree and it's totally fine to agree as long as you are hearing their reason and you have a reason as to why you agree or disagree. Because especially little kids, they want to agree with someone they like or they want to disagree with someone they're mad at, but that's not the point of agreeing or disagreeing in the classroom. And then the adding on signal. So sorry, I've got my books there, but just like building on. So to show that you want to add on to someone's idea. So those are just some different silent signals we use in class. And I've seen them used throughout our whole school. And I often, when I'm talking to someone, I'm just like, oh yeah, I agree. So it just, the more you use it, the more they use it. A big thing that I try to push in my classroom is orienting the students to each other. And I heard that being shared from Allison and Holly as well, that they don't want to be sort of intermediary between the students all the time. They want to make sure students are sharing amongst themselves and sort of forming those discussions on their own. So we, like Allison and Holly both said, we use turn and talks a lot. So in my class, students have assigned, they have carpet spots. So they have an assigned spot on the carpet with an assigned partner. and there's like a salt row and a pepper row. And so it gives them that idea of, okay, here's the question, turn to your partner, salt, start. So they know who's going to start. They know that they're sharing, who they're sharing with. We've talked a lot about those, what it looks like, sounds like, feels like. We do those types of charts at the beginning of the year, also more for the classroom norms of conversation or of anything. And a turn and talk is also a great way for kids to hold each other accountable, where they can say like, oh, I didn't hear what you said, or can you repeat that? Or, oh, you don't know what the question is, here's the question. So it's a way for them to hold each other accountable, and I don't have to as much. And that's a big thing, is like giving the students more responsibility so I can spend my time focusing on other things within the classroom. And like was stated before, students can practice speaking in a much lower stakes setting, especially students who speak another language besides English. It's a great way for them to practice, to hear things stated again, for them to feel more comfortable sharing rather than in the whole group. We also use a lot of sentence stems in elementary school, just to give them that practice of, rather than just saying like yes, no, one word answers, really building in the practice of answering in a complete sentence, giving a reason why, stating what you mean clearly. So I agree with blank because blank, I disagree with blank because blank, and then a way to add on, in addition to what blank said, I think blank. I know that one's a little wordy, but they can also say like, you know, if they don't have to use these exact sentence stems, but it's like a great way if they don't quite know where to start to give them that idea. And then I also really encourage and push focused listening in my class. So to me, it's really, really important that when someone is called on or someone is sharing, everyone else puts their hands down. Because if your hand is up, all you're doing is thinking about what you're going to say. And the point of someone else sharing is you're listening to them and thinking about what they're saying. So I know for a lot of people that seems kind of obvious, but elementary students really do need to be taught all of these things, that like when someone else talks, your hand is not up and you're listening to what they say. Students should be looking at the speaker. I really try to push that as well. And of course, with some caveats of, you know, certain students who might not like to look at the speaker or might, you know, can still show focus in other ways. But the majority of students should be looking at the speaker to show that they're giving that person their attention. And then just quick, easy reminders when students are not showing that focus listening. I often say, you know, oh, Holly's the speaker, so-and-so is the speaker, and it just gives them that reminder, oh, right, so they're the speaker, that's who I'm supposed to be listening to. Or often I can just like show with my hand that I'm moving down, so they should put their hand down. Because I'm in elementary school, I have students in my class all day. And so I really try to use some cross-content integration to continue with the philosophy ideals that Dr. Karen teaches in my class. And so we try to integrate wondering and questioning throughout all content areas. That is a reading skill that we use a lot when we read books, and math, especially like really tricky math problems. Wondering and noticing are really great ways for students who are not as confident in their own math skills. It's a really great way for them to have an entrance into a math problem, because they can notice, they can wonder, and they don't have to know how to multiply to be able to notice and wonder. Also, whenever we read a book that really makes us think or question, we say, oh, we got to share this with Dr. Karen. So just reminding them that, like, you know, we can bring something to the table in our philosophy time with Dr. Karen. It doesn't always have to be her. And we use our agree and disagree signals and sentence stems throughout all content areas. And the discussion expectations remain consistent across all content areas. So no matter what time of day it is, students are expected to do the same thing. And I think that sort of goes also with what I heard Holly say earlier, was just like having very clear expectations for students that are simple but clear helps hold them accountable and helps them hold themselves accountable, because they know what they're supposed to be doing, and they know if they don't do it, then there's going to be some sort of something, a consequence, meaning like a reminder, you know, a moving from where you are or something, so that way it's not like, I don't like you, but it's, I see that you're not following the expectations. Because, you know, some elementary school students will be like, you told me I didn't do this, you don't like me. But that, hopefully it takes that out of it. And then of course, there's always students who might need a little more support than what you're hoping to give to the whole class. And so that might mean just even more frequent reminders of the expectations, very simple restating of the expectations, like trying to keep as many words out of it, just like, you know, please sit down, just that simple, rather than making it become this whole big thing. Another thing is to thank other students nearby. So if I'm not doing the right thing or the expectation, but all the kids at my table are, then the teacher might, you know, highlight those other students nearby, and that gives the student who's not following the expectation that reminder that, oh yeah, she said all of these kids are doing what they're supposed to be doing, maybe I should too, and then I'll get to hear my name in a positive light. And then using proximity, so just moving closer to the student who might need some extra attention, a hand on the shoulder, simple things like that, just to remind them that, like, I'm here to help you, I'm here to support you. I also heard someone else say giving students that job or that leadership role. That's definitely something that can help students who might need some more support. It gives them something to focus on. It helps them feel successful in the classroom. And yeah. And then strategic ignoring. I know that sounds slightly counterintuitive, but like the reason students might be calling out or yelling or who knows what it is, you know, we've all seen many things, is they want attention. And if you even are saying like, we're not doing that, that's giving them the attention they want. So ignoring the behavior can be really hard, but very powerful. And encouraging students to ignore the behavior as well, I think, is key, because they are not as you know, well versed in controlling their emotions when they get frustrated. And so they will interact, or they, you know, they want to help, they really want to help other kids. And so they will, you know, interact with a kid who isn't doing that, following the expectations. And so really trying to encourage students to ignore the unexpected behaviors. And then also, along with ignoring, when you do see them following the correct behavior, acknowledging that right away, highlighting that right away. So it helps build their understanding that, like, you are acknowledging them, you are seeing them, but you're seeing them when they're doing what's being asked of them, and not when they're not doing what's being asked of them. I think that's all I have at the moment. How do you stop sharing? We use Teams in Seattle. Oh, stop share. There it is. Okay, there we go.
Sylvie, thank you so much. That was awesome. All three of these presentations were so good. They were so comprehensive, and it gives so much to think about. And just a reminder for our guests tonight too, that all of what our panelists were presenting is being recorded. So if you missed something, you can always go back to the website and rewatch and forward through and, you know, re-listen to any of our panelists. I always keep like a lot of notes, but if you missed something, you can always go back in there too. I just want to change the plan a little bit, because we're already at the 8 o'clock hour and we only have 30 minutes left. So rather than dominate the conversation, I have tons of questions I'd like to ask, but I'd really like to open it up to our guests tonight first. And if we could, if you want to verbally ask your question, please feel free to just raise your hand and I'll go in the order of the hands as they come in. If you're uncomfortable or if you're worried about your audio or anything like that, you are always welcome to drop your question in the comments and I'll make sure that I ask it so that everybody can hear it. But if there are any questions out there, please feel free to raise your hand and like I said, I'll go in the order. Jacqueline, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline. I'm a PhD student in philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm one of the philosophers in residence at a local public high school in Philly. This was really helpful. The question that I had was, what advice do you have for someone who's just coming in for maybe one push-in lesson? So I've done quite a few, like I'll work with a teacher, and today we did one on evaluating evidence, but it was my first time seeing those students. I was only there for one period. And like a lot of the things, like the really great suggestions are like harder for me to implement if I'm just there like one time. So I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on like what's like some of the most impactful like things that you can do on the shorter time frame.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? Will you be revisiting that same class? Will it be, or is it just a total sort of one-time visit?
So far, I think I've worked with like 7 teachers so far, and I haven't done any repeats, but several of them like found the experience like good and said, oh, maybe you can come back. I just haven't done that yet. So it's at Philly, it's like, wow, who knows what's gonna happen.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just talking about this with some people the other day, just how hard that is, right? I mean, it's so hard to do those like one-time meetings where, you don't know the kids, you haven't been able to establish norms, you're sort of inheriting the norms that have been established by the teacher in the classroom. It's just a really difficult thing if you're not working with a teacher who is deliberate about doing these sorts of things. So hats off to you. Thank you for that work. That's amazing. My suggestion, if it were going to be like, if you were going to the same class a few times, I would just have a conversation with the teacher about any sort of norms that they've already established in the classroom. And then that way you can sort of piggyback, you can use those already established rules and norms. But if it's really just kind of you coming in for one session, I think Holly's presentation gave a number of really cool ideas about like techniques to use if you're in the moment and you find like something happens, either one person is dominating the conversation or, nobody's talking, things like that. But yeah, no, that's a tough one. I would say just kind of think ahead about the issues that you're most worried about and then have some sort of strategy to deal with that. So like no one's talking. What I do in my class is I have someone recap where we are in the discussion, right? So I'll just sort of, if the discussion kind of starts to lull, I'll ask if someone will recap where have we made progress, where do we have consensus, and then I'll have them sort of say, okay, what are the open questions that are still, sort of remaining? So to just kind of think deliberately ahead about what are the things that you've noticed that have come up, and then to have some sort of strategy. Take a look at Holly's PowerPoint and kind of pick and choose, and Sylvie's, and pick and choose like sort of which of those strategies you might be able to incorporate for that.
Thanks.
Do Holly or Sylvie have anything they want to add to that?
I would add just briefly, if you can have them have little name tents, if they don't already have that, to be able to call people by name, I think forges a connection faster. So in a situation like that, I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I think relying on the classroom teachers' knowledge of the students is really helpful because, like Holly said, like relationships with the students is so important, and it's so integral in having them feel comfortable enough to share, especially on hard topics. And so trying to partner with those classroom teachers even more to draw on their knowledge of the students. But it's hard if you're only going to like all these classrooms once. That's a lot of work on you. So try and go to the same ones more often.
Hopefully they invite me back.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know one of my questions for the panelists was how long does it take to establish the norms in your classroom, and or is it just a constant maintenance? My guess is it's probably a constant maintenance, but it's true. Like when you're going in once and then you may not return for several weeks or at all, it does make things more difficult. Dwight, thank you for being patient.
My question is, what do you do when you have a student during a discussion that says something objectively untrue, misguided, or insensitive? Do you correct it in the moment? Do you wait? Do you have them sort of are in timeout of some sort? What do you do in that case?
I do think it's important to address it in the moment. And I think it's good. Allison, you may even see this more. I'm not sure, because I feel like as they get older, but I do think you're giving everybody the message that it's okay if you don't say something. So you need to do it in a way that obviously doesn't shut down the whole conversation. Sometimes I can say, wow, I'm having a lot of feelings around that right now. That would probably be where I might pause. But it would really depend on what they said. I don't think you can let it stand if it's causing real harm in the classroom.
Completely agree with that, Holly. I completely agree. You have to deal with it in the moment. And it's tough. It is contextual, right? It does kind of matter what the comment is and how it's said. There's so many sort of nuanced complexities there. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of ideas. But just understand that I don't mean that these ideas would apply to every circumstance, because they wouldn't, right? Like every circumstance kind of calls for a different response depending on the context. But I actually had it happen today. So perfect timing, right? Like perfect timing. I had it happen today. I had, well, I won't go into details, but yeah, it happened today. And so I took a step back and I said, okay, let's talk about what are the agreed upon facts. What are the areas where there is reasonable disagreement amongst reasonable people? And what are the areas that we're not willing to negotiate? Right? So I kind of divided into those categories. Like, what are the facts that we agree on, that are commonly agreed on? Where are the areas where reasonable people disagree? And where are the areas that don't fall into that category? Because it's kind of that whole both sidesism, right? You need to help students distinguish between situations where it's okay and a good thing to entertain both sides of an argument or a discussion, but then there are instances where reasonable people don't disagree about this, right? Like this isn't something where reasonable people disagree, and kind of helping students navigate through that. So that's how I did it today. And it seemed to work. It seemed to work. The thing that you have to kind of be careful of, I don't want my class sort of turning against one student in the class. We want to work together to build an understanding about what that person said, what was kind of maybe motivating that comment, and kind of helping that student maybe reach a different understanding. So another tactic that I use is I will oftentimes, this is more sort of more low stakes. So would be an example of a time where a student is really just misspeaking. They're not like saying something that's so outrageous, but they are saying something that is really insensitive, or they're saying it in a way that is very insensitive. And so I will oftentimes ask the student, I'll say, can I try to rephrase what you said in a way that you would agree with? And then I will rephrase what they said in a way that's more respectful to all populations. And then 99.999% of the time, they will say something like, yes, that's what I meant to say. And so you're taking a potentially incendiary comment, giving the student the benefit of the doubt, reframing what they said, and allowing them the opportunity to say, yes, that's what I meant to say. I wasn't saying it right. Because a lot of times they're saying what they hear at home. And so they're using phrases and language that they hear either from, from any number of places. And helping them to kind of reframe what they're trying to say is often helpful too. But that's, highly contextual.
I would add also, I totally agree that addressing it in the moment is really important for the, other students to see also that like, this is not something that is okay to say, or whatever the comment may be. This is not an appropriate comment. I think also just following up with the student who did say the comment later in a private conversation, and just sort of questioning as to why they said that, or where that idea was coming from, to get more at the root of the reasoning as to why they said it.
That can also be, in that individual conversation, be a good time for intent versus impact. I think that could be folded in there. Oftentimes I have.
And are there any other questions? Thank you very much. That was a really thoughtful response from all of you. And that was a great question too. Dwight, I always hate to err on the side of like the cynical, like what if, but these things do happen. And I feel like probably many people in this webinar right now may be here to hear things like that, because like all of the wonderful, beautiful things that happen in our classrooms that are positive are awesome. And that's why we do this. But there are those times that come up, and we do want to have some tools to deal with it, because sometimes it takes you off guard, and your response, I think what Holly was saying is like your body language has to mirror, the things that you expect. So that is a difficult one. Are there any other questions from the group? Because I do have one more from Jacqueline, but if anybody else has a question that they want to ask first. I don't see any other hands at this point. So Jacqueline, by all means, ask away.
Great, thanks. So another question I have is, like, as experienced teachers, you've probably observed the people come into your class, or, just things that you've seen. What are some of the mistakes that people who are new at teaching kids make? I have experience with the undergrads. Interestingly, I use a lot of these techniques with the undergrads at Penn, and they love the spectrum activity. They love four corners, like all of it works. But I was just wondering, like, what are the things that you see people doing? I'm thinking like someone who comes from a university, when they come, like what mistakes do they make?
I think sometimes they're too nice. Like, and not that I'm mean, but like oftentimes we think, especially when you're working, like I work with 8-year-olds, like they're little, but they can do a lot of things. And I think people who are new think that it's like okay to let things slide or to not hold them to the expectation or to not have high expectations for them. And that's just showing the students that they can do whatever they want. And like if you want it to be a functioning classroom where you can do all those really cool activities or have really great discussions, like it's not, you don't have to be mean, but you do have to like say, here's the line or here's the expectation, and like I know you can meet it, so I want to see you do that. Yeah, you can be mean in a nice way.
And you're not going to, at the high school level, you're not going to be their friend. That's not building community. So when we talk about building community, it's not about building friendships. And I think that sometimes that distinction is difficult for a lot of young teachers that I've worked with. There's a difference between building relationships and community, and like Sylvie said, like knowing that line. You're not, you need to enforce expectations. I would say the other big mistake that I see a lot, and I don't know if it's a mistake, it's just kind of the evolution of teaching, I think, is that you come in to in your early career in a classroom and you have all of these awesome ideas that you want to share with students. And new students and new teachers and facilitators tend to do a lot of talking because they have all of these ideas. They have, here's how it's going to work. And, here's what I think about, here's what I want to talk about. And it's not always like, there's not always as much room for student voice, and there's not always as much room for student interest. And it's a hard thing, right? Like I said, you're excited about teaching because you're excited about your content and you're excited about what you have to teach kids. But not talking as much and allowing more student voice and listening to students' interests to guide future lessons. Those are my observations.
I agree with both of you completely. The only thing I did mention before was the idea that like when you say something, make sure that your face and your like nonverbal communication is agreeing with it. So I think that gets confusing because I think, again, it's not that you're it's kind of like being too nice, but you might be saying something in a way that then is totally confusing for the students because they're like, sort of seemed like the teacher thought that was funny. And I really want the teacher to like me. And so it becomes then completely, you're just missing what they get confused. And ultimately, you want to have a good relationship. So the more clarity you can have, I think that's the better.
Thanks. It's all really helpful.
I did just want to follow up real quick on something that Laurie said a second ago about like how long does it take to get all of this in place? And I don't know if this offers a little like encouragement or hope to you all, but it doesn't take long. Like once you start to really think about this and be deliberate about it, habits develop and kids pick up on it really quickly. So the other day, and this is October, this is the end of October, and I was in a class and they were offering the free flu shot at school. So I had to pop out of class quick to like get my, free flu shot and, make that time period, the trials of a teacher. And the students were having a discussion and I left them. I was like, you guys know the rules, I'm going to pop out, get my flu shot. I'll be back in about 5-10 minutes. And I left the conversation. I popped out, I got my flu shot. I came back in and they were still having a conversation. And so it works. It works. And you get to the point where you can totally just kind of step back from the conversation and not be involved at all. And the students are completely in charge of like what's going on with that discussion. And it, like I said, it doesn't take long if you're deliberate about it. So I hopefully that provides a little encouragement.
Thanks for those questions, Jacqueline. Does anyone else have any questions? There was one specific question I want to ask before we begin to wrap up, because we are coming to the end of our time pretty quickly. It's pretty specific. I was going to save it, but I'll ask it. I want to blend the questions just a little bit. It was a question about the mind mapping, but I also kind of had it when Holly was speaking, and again when Sylvie was speaking about like who's running, like who's doing the mind mapping, and when you're coming up with questions for these discussions, do you vet those questions or do you kind of just let it go? Like, you know, so I guess that's kind of like a two-part question. The first part I think is for Allison. Do you create the mind maps? Do they do it individually? Do they do it as a class? Do they all build it together?
All of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. So it just totally depends on the topic that we're doing and the, you know, sort of where we are with that. But yeah, all of the above. At the beginning of the year, I do most of it. So I will map their conversation as they have it. We do a lot of direct instruction in terms of analyzing the arguments of others before we really start to have them develop their own argument. Towards the end of the year, they can start constructing an argument map. But that usually doesn't happen until, I would say, like a complex argument map from a discussion. They can do simple arguments very early on, but to map a discussion as it's happening, that's pretty difficult. And that will probably take them until like March to be able to do.
That is a difficult task because I've done that assignment and it takes a while for them to get good at that and to learn the software.
Yes.
That's another, like there's a learning curve in that too.
Yeah.
That you would think would be implicit in 2023 to students, but it's not.
No. They don't know how to organize files
I know.
on their Google Drive.
They definitely need more instruction in that than you think. I take it for granted sometimes and think they know and they're going to figure it out and they don't. Holly, how about the questions? When you have them prepare questions, do you vet them first, and are these planned discussions? How often do you discuss? Are they impromptu? That's a lot of questions for you.
And I think I like to do it both ways. And I've seen some teachers where they spend almost a whole period just coming up with questions when they have guests coming in, and they'll come up with who's going to speak first, how they're going to do it. So that I've seen. When I do it, I don't usually. Sometimes we talk about it a little bit. It depends. But when they're doing the full group discussions, I guide them. And when they I'll usually stand on the side. I'm with Allison. I think my best lessons are when I can stand on the side and just watch it kind of roll on its own. It's a remarkable thing about being a teacher, is kind of like getting yourself out of it, facilitating and setting it all up, and then letting them like fly. So I think they have to be structured beforehand. So when they have the notes, like for the Pharaoh discussion, I would have them organize it by like, what are their greatest achievements? How did they impact the people, right? And there were all different questions within. And so that kind of gave them an order. They didn't have to use that. If things got way off track, I would pause it. Let's pause here. Let's talk about, and let's kind of analyze where we are in this discussion and then get them back on. Later for the other questions, I guess, let me back up for a second. We did talk about how conversations go. What kind of questions you ask? How are you going to what kind of questions do your teachers ask? So I asked them to like kind of look back at their models. And then no, for the later one, I say, I love their creativity. I say, just make sure you write some questions on the side. We do talk about connecting self to text, and then connecting to like the world, and also connecting to prior knowledge. So there are all different ways to kind of look at the connections too. I like to see what they do. I probably give them a little more room and then remind them of the boundaries when they need it a little bit.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time, but I have one really quick question for Sylvie. And this is a very silly question, but the salt and pepper partners on the rugs was really cute. I love that. Do you switch up the salt and pepper partners throughout the year, or are they always with the same partner?
They are with the same partner. We switch maybe 3 times a year. It's really hard to make a seating chart that does all the things you want it to do. Like having a partner who's a good like language support for students, behavior, making sure, kids can see, and all sorts of things. So usually maybe twice, 2 or 3 times a year we switch. But they have different desk partners too. So they have different partners throughout the day.
All right. Well, I just want to personally thank all 3 of you. This was so great. I'm sure that all of our guests tonight found it really helpful too. I found a lot of helpful tools that I'm definitely going to be trying soon. So thank you so much. And I will send it back over to Karen.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Lori, for your great facilitating of the conversation. Thanks so much to Holly and Allison and Sylvie for all of your great insights. This really is like such a funny thing to say, but this really is a dream come true for me. I've been talking about trying to do a webinar like this for such a long time. And so it's really so fulfilling. And I took avid notes and learned so many things. And I made a note that Sylvie thinks I'm too nice. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. So thanks so much, everyone. The recording will be available on the website as soon as we can get it up there. We really appreciate you spending the evening with us and being part of our community of people who just really care about this work and care about one another and want to share what we know and help make things easier. So thanks so much to everybody, and particularly Lori and our panelists, and wishing you a safe and happy evening.
Or morning, wherever you are.
Right, sorry, or morning, yes.
Thank you so much. I know, Rainier, it's morning where you are.
That's right.
Bye, everybody.